How many of you saw the hot air balloons this week? Quite a few. It's pretty hard to miss them, or at least what you saw were the results of vehicles driving around on the back of the vehicle. You knew that they were with the hot air balloons. So I thought I'd share with you a story by Danny Cox. He writes a book called Seize the Day, and it's a very interesting story. One time, Danny and his wife were flying in a hot air balloon in Africa. And as the balloon was rising, they noticed a herd of wildebeest that are just running crazily through the African safari area. And they're running along, this herd is going, and then all of a sudden they stop. And they just kind of look around and are just act really, really confused. And so Danny and his wife, they asked the pilot, what's going on here? And the pilot says that the wildebeest are these great herd of animals that migrate pretty much all across the continent of Africa. But they're very, as he said, poor learners. He said that an entire herd will take flight at the slightest indication of danger, and then they forget why they were running in the first place, and then they just kind of look around and stop. And then he tells the story of the lions. He says that lions are good learners, and they know that wildebeest have this tendency. And so what they kind of do is they kind of stay behind the wildebeest, and when the wildebeest finally stop, it's dinner time. And then the guide also tells them the story that these wildebeest are so memory challenged that sometimes they will even go up to a sleeping lion, sniff at it, the lion wakes up and has breakfast in bed. Poor wildebeest. Imagine running around and forgetting why you're running. Does that sound like our summer? I mean, we run through the week to get out to the weekend so that we can get that spot out the lake, and then we find that everybody's there. Or we run to these sporting events, whether travel baseball or softball, or follow the Pioneers, and then poof, the season's over. Or we run through a job to get to vacation, and then bam, the vacation's done, it's back to work. We run across the state, or run across the country to visit and hang out with our grandkids. And before we know it, it's time to leave. We run through our career to get to retirement. And then what do we find in retirement? We are busier now than when we were employed. And of course, this summer, we run through everything this summer. And with school starting, we wonder what was all this running about. This summer, I hope we've had an opportunity to kind of slow things down a bit. At least on Sunday mornings, at least with these lessons from Paul. At least in our focus on hope. I mean, that's been our aim with these songs, worship time, and prayers. But also with these lessons from an early leader in the early church, who wanted these young Christians to understand something. Hope does exist. Hope can change lives. Hope can bring direction. And hope can bring meaning to whatever you're chasing. All we need to do is aim higher. Let's hear our lesson today from the letter of Colossians.
This is Colossians 3, 1 through 11. So if you have been raised with Christ, see the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you will also be revealed with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming on those who are disobedient. These are the ways you also once followed when you were living that life. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices and have clothed yourself with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its Creator. In that renewal there is no longer Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, and free, but Christ is all and in all.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes.
So there it is, the magic formula. Just put to death whatever's earthly. Get rid of those things that's on this list here, and you know renewal. Sounds like the end of the chase, right? Oh, if it was that easy. Bill Hybels was a pastor near Chicago. He's now retired, and he tells a great story on himself. He says that he remembers well when he was about 10 years old in math class, and that day they had a substitute teacher. Now, as Bill tells it, he was bored. He lost interest early in the class, and when he looked up at the clock, he realized it's another 30 minutes until recess. As he says, he had lost all hope that he would make it. Well, as Bill tells it, he must have had some sway in this fifth grade classroom because all of the other students kind of looked at Bill with this look of, do something about it. Now, Bill says that he's in one of those classes. You remember those classrooms that have that desk that pulled up from the top? You remember those desks? And you remember that when you would accidentally drop it, it would make a loud sound? So he gets this idea that if he can get all 25 of the classmates together at once and drop the desks at the same time, it would solve their boredom problem. And so he goes to work first with the troublemakers. And when he gets them on board, then it's with the good students. And then one by one, everything is ready for the plan. All he needed to do was get that substitute math teacher to turn around. And so young Billy, he raises his hand. He says, teacher, can you explain something that's on the board? She turns around as she's walking to the board. And as you guessed it, all 25 students raise their desks and accidentally drop them all at the same time. As Bill says, he said it was executed with military precision. This event, of course, was followed by lots of laughter. Well, you know what happened next. Teacher turned around and said, who did it? Just as the bell was ringing for recess. And of course, all 24 of the students all look at Bill at the same time, and several of them even said, that was awesome! Well, Bill had to sit in the front of the teacher's desk. There was no recess that day. He would have to call his parents. And then Bill says that he remembers exactly what that teacher said to him that day. Billy, it is obvious to me that you are a leader. The idea, getting everyone on board, getting me to turn around. I hope you use your leadership skills for good. Put your head on your desk and think about it. As Bill finishes his story, he says, that teacher planted a seed. I wanted to bring a high jump bar from the school, but it just wasn't very practical. So we're going to have to use this as an example of a high jump bar. But I'll tell you my point. When I was in high school, I did track. I did track for 4 years, but I only did high jump once because I just couldn't get over the bar. It was too high. So I want us to think of this concept of the bar. Where do you think Bill Hybels is as a 10-year-old? Is he up here? No. Is he down here? No. Is he one of those wildebeests that's kind of running around? That might be it. But I also want us to think about Paul and keep this bar in mind. For us to aim higher. For example, what if we understood the teachings of Paul and realized that aiming higher really does make a difference? I mean, that's what happened to Bill Hybels. He tells the story of how that substitute math teacher planted this seed. And this idea that you have the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. He just needed to aim higher. And so as he tells it, he remembers how he was traveling one time, and he was having lunch at a hotel restaurant, and he sees this waitress doing a really good job, and he says to her, "I think you're doing a really good job. In fact, I'm planning on staying at this hotel again when I'm in town because of your dedication to service." And the result was noteworthy. He said that when he went to that restaurant the next day, the waitress comes up to him and says that she couldn't sleep the night before because no one had ever believed in her until that day. Aim high. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but it is enough to make a difference. So that, of course, that brings us to this concept of the bar. It's all about the process. Now, when I was in high school, I failed at high jump because I could never figure out the process. Does anybody here know what is the process called to get over the high jump bar? Anybody know? It is called the Fosbury flop. And it goes like this. You start over here, and then you run this way, you plant your foot, and then somehow you arch your back in an unnatural way, and you get over. And I never figured out that process. I could not get that process done. Now, if I figured out the process, I would have been able to jump over the bar, and that was great. Now, I might not have necessarily won at high jump, but then I could have worked things on like agility and speed and quickness and all those things that go on. But think about this concept of figuring out the process. Once you figure out the process, it does make getting to the end result that much easier and more successful. Listen to this story from Leroy Imes. As a new Christian, I was working through Colossians. The Holy Spirit caught my attention with Colossians 3:8. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. I tried to slide past the verse, but the Spirit kept bringing me back to the words, get rid of anger. I had a violent temper. Whenever it flared, I'd haul up and bash my fist into the nearest door. Even though I often bloodied my knuckles and had once smashed the beautiful ring my wife had given me, I couldn't seem to stop. Yet here was God's word saying, get rid of anger. This wasn't just advice given to people of Colossae centuries ago. It was God speaking to me. So I made a covenant with God. I promised him I would work on my anger. My first step was to memorize Colossians 3:8 and review it daily. I then asked the Lord to bring this verse to mind whenever I might be tempted to lose my temper. And I asked my wife to pray for me and remind me of this verse if she ever saw me failing in my promise to the Lord. In time, this text became a part of my life. Gradually, the sin of anger lost its grip on me. You know, listening to this story reminds me of something else that Paul talks about. And we shared that with the kids today about putting on new clothes or trying on different clothes. Doesn't that sound a lot like aim high or aiming higher? Now, I am the first to admit that eliminating anger is a high bar mentality. But what would happen if we made that our goal? What if eliminating anger was our end goal? Doesn't that remind you a bit of what we talked about last week in last week's lesson? We talked about that hope is an end goal, and it especially is in each of these letters of Paul. But because Paul is writing to different communities and he has these different letters, he's addressing these specific situations. And because each letter is a bit different and each community is a bit different, the process is going to be a bit different, but it's all about the process of getting to the end goal of hope. So let's look at this list again. Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. And then he writes, but now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another. Now, as I look at this list, this is really not a Pauline thing. This is more of what Dave Ramsey calls the 80-20 rule. Now, if you've ever taken his class or know about his teachings, you know about when he talks about personal finance being the 80-20 rule. It goes something like this. Personal finance is 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior. So let's take the 80-20 rule and looking at this list here. Now, when we look at this list, we know that this stuff is going to lead to bad things. Can I get an amen there?
Amen.
We know this stuff is going to lead down a destructive path and certainly away from hope. We know this. This is common sense. This is head knowledge stuff. This is the 20%. The 80% is the behavior. That is the process. Aim high and make the change. Sounds easy, right? I mean, just follow the process, we can stop being the wildebeest. Just follow the process, and we can get to the end goal. Just follow the process, we can be more like Paul, right? Easy peasy. But have you ever tried to change something? Either in your job, or in your family, or with your spouse, or in the church, or in your personal finances, or with yourself? How'd that go? You know, the first time that we held the Dave Ramsey course here, we had 4 families that were retaking the course. That meant that they had taken the course of Dave Ramsey, they had graduated from it, they'd gone on a budget, they'd done all the things that they were supposed to. They found that it's easy to change, but it's easier still to go back to old and bad habits. Before I left for vacation, I shared with you that I was reading this book by Ed Catmull. Ed is the founder and the CEO of Pixar. And so while I was over on vacation, I was able to finish the book. As you might imagine, he talks a lot about creativity. He talks a lot about change, and he talks a lot about being successful, and very, very successful. So one of the things, there's a big section there, Pixar merges with Disney Animation Studio. Now you're talking about the giants in animation. As you might imagine, it creates a lot of change. So listen to a couple things he says. People want to hang on to the things that work, stories that work, methods that work, strategies that work. You figure something out, it works, so you keep doing it. This is what an organization that is committed to learning does. And as we become successful, our approaches are reinforced, and we become even more resistant to change. And then he says, after having some time after the 2 organizations merged together, and there's all this anxiety over the change and what's going to take place in this first job and that job and all kinds of things, he says this. It's a great metaphor. Fear of change, innate, stubborn, and resistant to reason, is a powerful force. In many ways, it reminded me of musical chairs. We cling as long as possible to the perceived safe place that we already know, refusing to loosen our grip until we feel sure another safe place awaits. What a telling metaphor. We won't change unless we think it's safe. And if there's anything that you get out of this sermon, it is this quote. People must treat change as a friend and never think change is unnecessary. So think about what that means. You've got to want to aim high. You've got to want to reach the end goal. You've got to want to do those things that makes a difference. You got to want to follow the process. You know, clap, do the Fosbury flop. So what would that look like if we started with something small? I recently saw a TED Talk by Megan Phelps-Roper. Her grandfather is Fred Phelps, the founding pastor of Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas. She says that her first memory that she has is going to a protest rally holding a sign up that she couldn't read. And then she talks about how she came to leave her family's church. And she says it was all through, guess what? Twitter. Now the rest of the church, they didn't want to do social media, but she insisted that she could use social media to argue her point and argue about the church. And she argued it vehemently. And then, of course, people began to argue back to her vehemently. But then she noticed something about the process. As they would argue back and forth, they started to create a relationship and even a friendship. And she tells this fascinating story about how when she would say that they're going to be in a certain village or a certain town to do a protest rally, and these friends would say, "Hey, we'll come out and we'll meet you." And she tells this one story how she's in New Orleans. She has this Jewish friend that she's been dialoguing with. And he comes and he brings her a kosher meal, all the while she's holding a sign that says, "Jews killed Jesus." It's a fascinating talk, 15 minutes long. It is wonderful. And in it, she talks about this process, about this dialogue that takes place, and how that leads to this friendship. And then she points at a ring and she says, Mr. Roper, who is now her husband, is one of those persons that she met on Twitter that she first argued with, and that is now her husband. I'm going to end today with one of my favorite stories. Once upon a time, there was a wise man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had a habit of walking on the beach before he would go to work, or before he would begin his work. One day, as he was walking along the shore, he looked down at the beach and saw a human figure moving like a dancer. He smiled to himself at the thought of someone who would dance to the day, and so he walked faster to catch up. He got closer. He noticed that the figure was that of a young man, and that what he was doing was not dancing at all. The young man was reaching down to the shore, picking up small objects and throwing them into the ocean. He came closer still and called out, "Good morning. May I ask what it is that you're doing?" And the young man paused and looked up and replied, "Throwing starfish into the ocean." "I might ask then, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean?" asked the somewhat startled wise man. To this, the young man replied, "The sun is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them in, they'll die." Upon hearing this, the wise man commented, "But young man, do you not realize that there are miles and miles of beach? And there are starfish all along every mile. You can't possibly make a difference." At this, the young man bent down, picked up another starfish, threw it out into the ocean, and said, "It made a difference to that one." Now that's a story of a high bar mentality. But what if we try with just one starfish? What if we work on just one of those destructive things on Paul's list? What if we aim high and try on those new clothes that Paul is talking about? Do you think we would see and experience and know hope? Do you think we would make a difference in our lives and the lives of others? I think it made a difference in that one starfish. It made a difference in Megan Phelps-Roper's life. And I think it would make a difference in yours. So the ushers are all ready for us.